Though I thus took part in the war as a matter of duty, it chanced that I was not only unable directly to participate in it, but actually compelled to offer what may be called miniature Satyagraha even at that critical juncture. I have already said that an officer was appointed in charge of our training as soon as our names were approved and enlisted. We were all under the impression that this commanding officer was to be our chief only so far as the technical matters were concerned, and that in all other matters I was to be the head of our corps, which was directly responsible to me in matters of internal discipline. That is to say, the commanding officer had to deal with the corps through me. But from the first, the officer left us under no much delusion. Mr. Sorabji Adajania was a shrewd man. He warned me. "Beware of this man," he said. "He seems inclined to lord it over us. We will have none of his orders. We are prepared to look upon him as our instructor, but the youngsters he has appointed to instruct us also feel as though they had come as our masters." These youngsters were Oxford students who had come to instruct us and whom the commanding officer had appointed to be our section leaders. I also had not failed to notice the high-handedness of the commanding officer, but I asked Sorabji not to be anxious and tried to pacify him. But he was not the man to be easily convinced. "You are too trusting. Those people will deceive you with wretched words, and when at last you see through them, you will ask us to resort to Satyagraha and so come to grief and bring us all to grief along with you," said he with a smile. "What else but grief can you hope to come to after having cast in your lot with me?" said I. "A Satyagrahi is born to be deceived. Let the commanding officer deceive us. Have I not told you times without number that ultimately a deceiver only deceives himself?" Sorabji gave a loud laugh. "Well then," said he, "continue to be deceived. You will someday meet your death in Satyagraha and drag poor mortals like me behind you." These words put me in mind of what the late Miss Emily Hobhouse wrote to me with regard to non-cooperation. I should not be surprised if one of these days you have to go to the gallows for the sake of truth. May God show you the right path and protect you. The talk with Sorabji took place just after the appointment of the commanding officer. In a very few days, our relations with him reached the breaking point. I had hardly regained my strength after the 14 days fast when I began to take part in the drill, often walking to the appointed place about 2 miles from home. This gave me pleurisy and laid me low. In this condition, I had to go weekend camping. Whilst the others stayed there, I returned home. It was here that an occasion arose for Satyagraha. The commanding officer began to exercise his authority somewhat freely. He gave us clearly to understand that he was our head in all matters, military and non-military, giving us at the same time a taste of his authority. Sorabji hurried to me. He was not at all prepared to put up with his high-handedness. He said, "We must have all orders through you. We are still in the training camp, and all sorts of absurd orders are being issued. Invidious distinctions are made between ourselves and those youths who have been appointed to instruct us. We must have it out with the commanding officer, otherwise we shall not be able to go on any longer. The Indian students and others who have joined our corps are not going to abide by any absurd orders. In a cause which has been taken up for the sake of self-respect, it is unthinkable to put up with the loss of it." I approached the commanding officer and drew his attention to the complaints I had received. He wrote asking me to set out the complaints in writing. At the same time, asking me to impress upon those who complain that the proper direction in which to make complaints is to me through their section commanders, now appointed, who will inform me through the instructors. To this I replied, saying that I claimed no authority, that in the military sense I was no more than any other private, but that I had believed that as a chairman of the volunteer corps, I should be allowed, unofficially, to act as their representative. I also set out the grievances and requests that had been brought to my notice, namely, the grievous dissatisfaction had been caused by the appointment of section officers without reference to the feeling of the members of the corps, that they be recalled and the corps be invited to elect section leaders subject to the commander's approval. This did not appeal to the commanding officer, who said it was repugnant to all military discipline that the section leaders should be elected by the corps, and that the recall of appointments already made would be subversive of all discipline. So we held a meeting and decided upon withdrawal. I brought home to the members the serious consequences of Satyagraha. But a very large majority voted for the resolution, which was to the effect that unless the appointments of corporals already made were recalled and the members of the corps given an opportunity of electing their own corporals, the members would be obliged to abstain from further drilling and weekend camping. I then addressed a letter to the commanding officer telling him what a severe disappointment his letter rejecting my suggestion had been. I assured him that I was most anxious to serve. I also drew his attention to a precedent. I pointed out that although I occupied no official rank in the South African Indian Ambulance Corps at the time of the Boer War, there was never a hitch between Colonel Galway and the corps, and the colonel never took a step without reference to me with a view to ascertain the wishes of the corps. I also enclosed a copy of the resolution we had passed the previous evening. This had no good effect on the officer, who felt that the meeting and the resolution were a grave breach of discipline. Hereupon I addressed a letter to the Secretary of State for India, acquainting him with all the facts and enclosing a copy of the resolution. He replied, explaining that conditions in South Africa were different, and drawing my attention to the fact that under the rules the section commanders were appointed by the commanding officer, but assuring me that in future, when appointing section commanders, the commanding officer would consider my recommendations. A good deal of correspondence passed between us after this, but I do not want to prolong the bitter tale. Suffice it to say that my experience was of a pace with the experiences we daily have in India. What with threats and what with adroitness, the commanding officer succeeded in creating a division in our corps. Some of those who had voted for the resolution yielded to the commander's threats or persuasions and went back on their promise. About this time, an unexpectedly large contingent of wounded soldiers arrived at the Netley hospital, and the services of our corps were requisitioned. Those whom the commanding officer could persuade went to Netley. The others refused to go. I was on my back, but was in communication with the members of the corps. Mr. Roberts, the Under Secretary of State, honored me with many calls during those days. He insisted on my persuading the others to serve. He suggested that they should form a separate corps, and that at the Netley hospital they could be responsible only to the commanding officer there, so that there would be no question of a loss of self-respect, government would be placated, and at the same time helpful service would be rendered to the large number of wounded received at the hospital. This suggestion appealed both to my companions and me, with the result that those who had stayed away also went to Netley. Only I remained away, lying on my back and making the best of a bad job. I have already referred to the attack of pleurisy I had in England. Gokhale returned to London soon after. Colin Bach and I used regularly to go to him. Our talks were mostly about the war, and as Colin Bach had the geography of Germany at his fingertips and had travelled much in Europe, he used to show him on the map the various places in connection with the war. When I got pleurisy, this also became a topic of daily discussion. My dietetic experiments were going on even then. My diet consisted, among other things, of groundnuts, ripe and unripe bananas, lemon, olive oil, tomatoes, and grapes. I completely eschewed milk, cereals, pulses, and other things. Dr. Jeevraj Mehta treated me. He pressed me hard to resume milk and cereals, but I was obdurate. The matter reached Gokhale's ears. He had not much regard for my reasoning in favor of a fruitarian diet, and he wanted me to take whatever the doctor prescribed for my health. It was not so easy thing for me not to yield to Gokhale's pressure. When he would not take a refusal, I begged him to give me 24 hours for thinking over the question. As Colin Bach and I returned home that evening, we discussed where my duty lay. He had been with me in my experiment. He liked it, but I saw that he was agreeable to my giving it up if my health demanded it. So I had to decide for myself, according to the dictates of the inner voice. I spent the whole night thinking over the matter. To give up the experiment would mean renouncing all my ideas in that direction, and yet I found no flaw in them. The question was how far I should yield to Gokhale's loving pressure and how far I might modify my experiment in the so-called interests of health. I finally decided to adhere to the experiment insofar as the motive behind was chiefly religious, and to yield to the doctor's advice where the motive was mixed. Religious considerations had been predominant in the giving up of milk. I had before me a picture of the wicked processes the Gowals in Calcutta adopted to extract the last drop of milk from their cows and buffaloes. I also had the feeling that, just as meat was not man's food, even so animals' milk could not be man's food. So I got up in the morning with the determination to adhere to my resolve to abstain from milk. This greatly relieved me. I dreaded to approach Gokhale, but I trusted him to respect my decision. In the evening, Colin Bach and I called on Gokhale at the National Liberal Club. The first question he asked me was, "Well, have you decided to accept the doctor's advice?" I gently but firmly replied, "I am willing to yield on all points except one, about which I beg you not to press me. I will not take milk, milk products, or meat. If not to take these things should mean my death, I feel I had better face it." "Is this your final decision?" asked Gokhale. "I am afraid I cannot decide otherwise," said I. "I know that my decision will pain you, but I beg your forgiveness." With a certain amount of pain, but with deep affection, Gokhale said, "I do not approve of your decision. I do not see any religion in it, but I won't press you any more." With these words, he turned to Dr. Jeevraj Mehta and said, "Please don't worry him any more. Prescribe anything you like within the limit he has set for himself." The doctor expressed dissent, but was helpless. He advised me to take mung soup with a dash of asafoetida in it. To this I agreed. I took it for a day or two, but it increased my pain. As I did not find it suitable, I went back to fruits and nuts. The doctor, of course, went on with his external treatment. The latter somewhat relieved my pain, but my restrictions were to him a sore handicap. Meanwhile, Gokhale left for home, as he could not stand the October fogs of London. The persistence of the pleurisy caused some anxiety, but I knew that the cure lay not in taking medicine internally, but in dietetic changes assisted by external remedies. I called in Dr. Allinson of vegetarian fame, who treated diseases by dietetic modifications and whom I had met in 1890. He thoroughly overhauled me. I explained to him how I had pledged myself not to take milk. He cheered me up and said, "You need not take milk. In fact, I want you to do without any fat for some days." He then advised me to live on plain brown bread, raw vegetables such as beet, radish, onion and other tubers and greens, and also fresh fruit, mainly oranges. The vegetables were not to be cooked but merely grated fine, if I could not masticate them. I adopted this for about 3 days, but raw vegetables did not quite suit me. My body was not in a condition to enable me to do full justice to the experiment. I was nervous about taking raw vegetables. Dr. Allinson also advised me to keep all the windows of my room open for the whole 24 hours, bathe in tepid water, have an oil massage on the affected parts, and a walk in the open for 15 to 30 minutes. I liked all these suggestions. My room had French windows, which, if kept wide open, would let in the rain. The fan light could not be opened. I therefore got the glass broken so as to let in fresh air, and I partially opened the windows in a manner not to let in rain. All these measures somewhat improved my health, but did not completely cure me. Lady Cecilia Roberts occasionally called on me. We became friends. She wanted very much to persuade me to take milk. But as I was unyielding, she hunted about for a substitute for milk. Some friend suggested to her malted milk, assuring her quite unknowingly that it was absolutely free from milk and that it was a chemical preparation with all the properties of milk. Lady Cecilia, I knew, had a great regard for my religious scruples, and so I implicitly trusted her. I dissolved the powder in water and took it only to find that it tasted just like milk. I read the label on the bottle to find only too late that it was a preparation of milk, so I gave it up. I informed Lady Cecilia about the discovery, asking her not to worry over it. She came post-haste to me to say how sorry she was. Her friend had not read the label at all. I begged her not to be anxious and expressed my regret that I could not avail myself of the thing she had procured with so much trouble. I also assured her that I did not at all feel upset or guilty over having taken milk under a misapprehension. I must skip over many other sweet reminiscences of my contact with Lady Cecilia. I could think of many friends who have been a source of great comfort to me in the midst of trials and disappointments. One who has faith reads in them the merciful providence of God, who thus sweetens sorrow itself. Dr. Allinson, when he next called, relaxed his restrictions and permitted me to have groundnut butter or olive oil for the sake of fat, and to take the vegetables cooked, if I chose, with rice. These changes were quite welcome, but they were far from giving me a complete cure. Very careful nursing was still necessary, and I was obliged to keep mostly in bed. Dr. Mehta occasionally looked in to examine me and held out a standing offer to cure me if only I would listen to his advice. Whilst things were going on in this way, Mr. Roberts one day came to see me and urged me very strongly to go home. You cannot possibly go to Netley in this condition. There is a still severer cold ahead of us. I would strongly advise you to get back to India, for it is only there that you can be completely cured. If after your recovery you should find the war still going on, you will have many opportunities there of rendering help. As it is, I do not regard what you have already done as by any means a mean contribution. I accepted his advice and began to make preparations for returning to India. Mr. Kallenbach had accompanied me to England with a view to going to India. We were staying together and of course wanted to sail by the same boat. Germans, however, were under such strict surveillance that we had our doubts about Mr. Kallenbach getting a passport. I did my best to get it, and Mr. Roberts, who was in favor of his getting his passport, sent a cable to the Viceroy in this behalf. But straight came Lord Hardinge's reply. Regret Government of India not prepared to take any such risk. All of us understood the force of the reply. It was a great wrench for me to part from Mr. Kallenbach, but I could see that his pang was greater. Could he have come to India, he would have been leading today the simple, happy life of a farmer and a weaver. Now he is in South Africa, leading his old life and doing brisk business as an architect. We wanted a third-class passage, but as there was none available on P&O boats, we had to go second. We took with us the dried fruit we had carried from South Africa, as most of it would not be procurable on the boat, where fresh fruit was easily available. Dr. Jeevraj Mehta had bandaged my ribs with Mead's plaster and had asked me not to remove it till we reached the Red Sea. For 2 days I put up with the discomfort, but finally it became too much for me. It was with considerable difficulty that I managed to undo the plaster and regain the liberty of having a proper wash and bath. My diet consisted mostly of nuts and fruits. I found that I was improving every day and felt very much better by the time we entered the Suez Canal. I was weak but felt entirely out of danger, and I gradually went on increasing my exercise. The improvement I attributed largely to the pure air of the temperate zone. Whether it was due to past experience or to any other reason, I do not know, but the kind of distance I noticed between the English and Indian passengers on the boat was something I had not observed even on my voyage from South Africa. I did talk to a few Englishmen, but the talk was mostly formal. There were hardly any cordial conversations such as had certainly taken place on the South African boats. The reason for this was, I think, to be found in the conscious or unconscious feeling at the back of the Englishman's mind that he belonged to the ruling race, and the feeling at the back of the Indian's mind that he belonged to the subject race. I was eager to reach home and get free from this atmosphere. On arriving at Aden, we already began to feel somewhat at home. We knew the Adenwalas very well, having met Mr. Kekobad Kesavji Dinsha in Durban, and came in close contact with him and his wife. A few days more and we reached Bombay. It was such a joy to get back to the homeland after an exile of 10 years. Before coming to a narrative of the course my life took in India, it seems necessary to recall a few of the South African experiences which I have deliberately left out. Some loyal friends have asked me to give my reminiscences of the bar. The number of these is so large that if I were to describe them all, they would occupy a volume by themselves and take me out of my scope. But it may not perhaps be improper to recall some of those which bear upon the practice of truth. So far as I can recollect, I have already said that I never resorted to untruth in my profession, and that a large part of my legal practice was in the interest of a public work, for which I charged nothing beyond out-of-pocket expenses, and these too I sometimes met myself. I had thought that in saying this I had said all that was necessary as regards my legal practice, but friends want me to do more. They seem to think that if I described, however slightly, some of the occasions when I refused to swerve from the truth, the legal profession might profit by it. As a student, I had heard that the lawyer's profession was a liar's profession, but this did not influence me, as I had no intention of earning either position or money by lying. My principle was put to the test many a time in South Africa. Often I knew that my opponents had tutored their witnesses, and if I only encouraged my client or his witnesses to lie, he could win the case. But I always resisted the temptation. I remember only one occasion when, after having won a case, I suspected that my client had deceived me. In my heart of hearts, I always wished that I should win only if my client's case was right. In fixing my face, I do not recall ever having made them conditional on my winning the case. Whether my client won or lost, I expected nothing more nor less than my face. I warned every new client at the outset that he should not expect me to take up a false case or to coach the witnesses, with the result that I built up such a reputation that no false cases used to come to me. Indeed, some of my clients would keep their clean cases for me and take the doubtful ones elsewhere. There was one case which proved a severe trial. It was brought to me by one of my best clients. It was a case of highly complicated accounts and had been a prolonged one. It had been heard in parts before several courts. Ultimately, the bookkeeping portion of it was entrusted by the court to the arbitration of some qualified accountants. The award was entirely in favor of my client, but the arbitrators had inadvertently committed an error in calculation which, however small, was serious, inasmuch as an entry which ought to have been on the debit side was made on the credit side. The opponents had opposed the award on other grounds. I was junior counsel for my client. When the senior counsel became aware of the error, he was of opinion that our client was not bound to admit it. He was clearly of opinion that no counsel was bound to admit anything that went against his client's interest. I said we ought to admit the error. But the senior counsel contended. In that case, there is every likelihood of the court cancelling the whole award, and no sane counsel would imperil his client's case to that extent. At any rate, I would be the last man to take any such risk. If the case were to be sent up for a fresh hearing, one could never tell what expenses our client might have to incur and what the ultimate result might be. The client was present when this conversation took place. I said, I feel that both our client and we ought to run the risk. Where is the certainty of the court upholding a wrong award simply because we do not admit the error? And supposing the admission were to bring the client to grief, what harm is there? But why should we make the admission at all? Said the senior counsel. Where is the surety of the court not detecting the error or our opponent not discovering it? Said I. Well then, will you argue the case? I am not prepared to argue it on your terms, replied the senior counsel with decision. I humbly answered, if you will not argue, then I am prepared to do so, if our client so desires. I shall have nothing to do with the case if the error is not admitted. With this, I looked at my client. He was a little embarrassed. I had been in the case from the very first. The client fully trusted me and knew me through and through. He said, well then, you will argue the case and admit the error. Let us lose if that is to be our lot. God defend the right. I was delighted. I had expected nothing less from him. The senior counsel again warned me, pitied me for my obduracy, but congratulated me all the same. What happened in the court we shall see in the next chapter. I had no doubt about the soundness of my advice, but I doubted very much my fitness for doing full justice to the case. I felt it would be a most hazardous undertaking to argue such a difficult case before the Supreme Court, and I appeared before the bench in fear and trembling. As soon as I referred to the error in the accounts, one of the judges said, "Is not this sharp practice, Mr. Gandhi?" I boiled within to hear this charge. It was intolerable to be accused of sharp practice when there was not the slightest warrant for it. With a judge prejudiced from the start like this, there is little chance of success in this difficult case, I said to myself. But I composed my thoughts and answered, "I am surprised that your lordship should suspect sharp practice without hearing me out." "No question of a charge," said the judge. "It is a mere suggestion." "The suggestion here seems to me to amount to a charge. I would ask your lordship to hear me out and then arraign me if there is any occasion for it." "I am sorry to have interrupted you," replied the judge. "Pray do go on with your explanation of the discrepancy." I had enough material in support of my explanation. Thanks to the judge having raised this question, I was able to rivet the court's attention on my argument from the very start. I felt much encouraged and took the opportunity of entering into a detailed explanation. The court gave me a patient hearing, and I was able to convince the judges that the discrepancy was due entirely to inadvertence. They therefore did not feel disposed to cancel the whole award, which had involved considerable labor. The opposing counsel seemed to feel secure in the belief that not much argument would be needed after the error had been admitted. But the judges continued to interrupt him as they were convinced that the error was a slip which could be easily rectified. The counsel labored hard to attack the award, but the judge who had originally started with the suspicion had now come round definitely to my side. "Supposing Mr. Gandhi had not admitted the error, what would you have done?" he asked. It was impossible for us to secure the services of a more competent and honest expert accountant than the one appointed by us. "The court must presume that you know your case best. If you cannot point out anything beyond the slip which any expert accountant is liable to commit, the court will be loath to compel the parties to go in for a fresh litigation and fresh expenses because of a patent mistake. We may not order a fresh hearing when such an error can be easily corrected," continued the judge. And so the counsel's objection was overruled. The court either confirmed the award with the error rectified or ordered the arbitrator to rectify the error, I forget which. I was delighted. So were my client and senior counsel. And I was confirmed in my conviction that it was not impossible to practice law without compromising faith. Let the reader, however, remember that even truthfulness in the practice of the profession cannot cure it of the fundamental defect that vitiates it. The distinction between the legal practice in Natal and in the Transvaal was that in Natal there was a joint bar. A barrister, while he was admitted to the rank of advocate, could also practice as an attorney, whereas in the Transvaal, as in Bombay, the spheres of attorneys and advocates were distinct. A barrister had the right of election whether he would practice as an advocate or as an attorney. So whilst in Natal I was admitted as an advocate, in the Transvaal I sought admission as an attorney. For as an advocate I could not come in direct contact with the Indians, and the white attorneys in South Africa would not have briefed me. But even in the Transvaal, it was open to attorneys to appear before magistrates. On one occasion, whilst I was conducting a case before a magistrate in Johannesburg, I discovered that my client had deceived me. I saw him completely break down in the witness box. So, without any argument, I asked the magistrate to dismiss the case. The opposing counsel was astonished, and the magistrate was pleased. I rebuked my client for bringing a false case to me. He knew that I never accepted false cases, and when I brought the thing home to him, he admitted his mistake, and I have an impression that he was not angry with me for having asked the magistrate to decide against him. At any rate, my conduct in this case did not affect my practice for the worse. Indeed, it made my work easier. I also saw that my devotion to truth enhanced my reputation amongst the members of the profession, and in spite of the handicap of color, I was able in some cases to win even their affection. During my professional work, it was also my habit never to conceal my ignorance from my clients or my colleagues. Wherever I felt myself at sea, I would advise my client to consult some other counsel, or if he preferred to stick to me, I would ask him to let me seek the assistance of a senior counsel. This frankness earned me the unbounded affection and trust of my clients. They were always willing to pay the fee whenever consultation with the senior counsel was necessary. This affection and trust served me in good stead in my public work. I have indicated in the foregoing chapters that my object in practicing in South Africa was service of the community. Even for this purpose, winning the confidence of the people was an indispensable condition. The large-hearted Indian magnified into service professional work done for money, and when I advised them to suffer the hardships of imprisonment for the sake of their rights, many of them cheerfully accepted the advice, not so much because they had reasoned out the correctness of the course, as because of their confidence in and affection for me. As I write this, many a sweet reminiscence comes to my mind. Hundreds of clients became friends and real co-workers in public service, and their association sweetened a life that was otherwise full of difficulties and dangers. The reader by now will be quite familiar with Parsi Rustamji's name. He was one who became at once my client and co-worker, or perhaps it would be truer to say that he first became co-worker and then client. I won his confidence to such an extent that he sought and followed my advice also in private domestic matters. Even when he was ill, he would seek my aid, and though there was much difference between our ways of living, he did not hesitate to accept my quack treatment. This friend once got into a very bad scrape. Though he kept me informed of most of his affairs, he had studiously kept back one thing. He was a large importer of goods from Bombay and Calcutta, and not infrequently he resorted to smuggling. But as he was on the best terms with the customs officials, no one was inclined to suspect him. In charging duty, they used to take his invoices on trust. Some might even have connived at the smuggling. But to use the telling simile of the Gujarati poet Akho, theft like quicksilver won't be suppressed, and Parsi Rustamji's proved no exception. The good friend ran post-haste to me, the tears rolling down his cheeks as he said, "Bhai, I have deceived you. My guilt has been discovered today. I have smuggled and I am doomed. I must go to jail and be ruined. You alone may be able to save me from this predicament. I have kept back nothing else from you. But I thought I ought not to bother you with such tricks of the trade, and so I never told you about this smuggling. But now, how much I repent it." I calmed him and said, To save or not to save you is in his hands. As to me, you know my way. I can but try to save you by means of confession. The good Parsi felt deeply mortified. But is not my confession before you enough? He asked. You have wronged not me but government. How will the confession made before me avail you? I replied gently. Of course, I will do just as you advise, but will you not consult with my old counsel Mr. So-and-so? He is a friend too, said Parsi Rustamji. Inquiry revealed that the smuggling had been going on for a long time, but the actual offence detected involved a trifling sum. We went to his counsel. He perused the papers and said, The case will be tried by a jury, and a not all jury will be the past to acquit an Indian. But I will not give up hope. I did not know this counsel intimately. Parsi Rustamji intercepted. I thank you, but I should like to be guided by Mr. Gandhi's advice in this case. He knows me intimately. Of course, you will advise him whenever necessary. Having thus shelved the counsel's question, we went to Parsi Rustamji's shop. And now, explaining my view, I said to him, I don't think this case should be taken to court at all. It rests with the customs officer to prosecute you or to let you go, and he, in turn, will have to be guided by the Attorney General. I am prepared to meet both. I propose that you should offer to pay the penalty that fix, and the odds are that they will be agreeable. But if they are not, you must be prepared to go to jail. I am of opinion that the shame lies not so much in going to jail as in committing the offence. The deed of shame has already been done. Imprisonment you should regard as a penance. The real penance lies in resolving never to smuggle again. I cannot say that Parsi Rustamji took all this quite well. He was a brave man, but his courage failed him for the moment. His name and fame were at stake, and where would he be if the edifice he had reared with such care and labor should go to pieces? Well, I have told you, he said, that I am entirely in your hands. You may do just as you like. I brought to bear on this case all my powers of persuasion. I met the customs officer and fearlessly apprised him of the whole affair. I also promised to place all the books at his disposal and told him how penitent Parsi Rustamji was feeling. The customs officer said, I like the old Parsi. I am sorry he has made a fool of himself. You know where my duty lies. I must be guided by the Attorney General, and so I would advise you to use all your persuasion with him. I shall be thankful, said I, if you do not insist on dragging him into court. Having got him to promise this, I entered into correspondence with the Attorney General and also met him. I am glad to say that he appreciated my complete frankness and was convinced that I had kept back nothing. I now forget whether it was in connection with this or with some other case that my persistence and frankness extorted from him the remark, I see you will never take a no for an answer. The case against Parsi Rustamji was compromised. He was to pay a penalty equal to twice the amount he had confessed to having smuggled. Rustamji reduced to writing the facts of the whole case, got the paper framed and hung it up in his office to serve as a perpetual reminder to his heirs and fellow merchants. These friends Rustamji warned me not to be taken in by this transitory contrition. When I told Rustamji about this warning, he said, What would be my fate if I deceived you? Before I reached home, the party which had started from Phoenix had already arrived. According to our original plan, I was to have preceded them, but my preoccupation in England with the war had upset all our calculations And when I saw that I had to be detained in England indefinitely, I was faced with the question of finding them all to stay together, the Phoenix Party. I wanted them all to stay together in India if possible and to live the life they had led at Phoenix. I did not know of any ashram to which I could recommend them to go, and therefore cabled to them to meet Mr. Andrews and do as he advised. So they were first put in the Gurukul, Kangri, where the late Swami Shraddhanandaji treated them as his own children. After this they were put in the Shantiniketan ashram, where the poet and his people showered similar love upon them. The experiences they gathered at both these places too stood them and me in good stead. The poet Shraddhanandaji and Principal Sushil Rudra, as I used to say to Andrews, composed his Trinity. When in South Africa he was never tired of speaking them, and of my many sweet memories of South Africa, Mr. Andrews' talks day in and day out of this great Trinity are amongst the sweetest and most vivid. Mr. Andrews naturally put the Phoenix Party in touch also with Sushil Rudra. Principal Rudra had no ashram, but he had a home which he placed completely at the disposal of the Phoenix family. Within a day of their arrival, his people made them deal so thoroughly at home that they did not seem to miss Phoenix at all. It was only when I landed in Bombay that I learnt that the Phoenix Party was at Shantiniketan. I was therefore impatient to meet them as soon as I could after my meeting with Gokhale. The receptions in Bombay gave me an occasion for offering what might be called a little Satyagraha. At the party given in my honor at Mr. Jahangir Petit's place, I did not dare to speak in Gujarati. In those palatial surroundings of dazzling splendor, I, who had lived my best life among indentured labourers, felt myself a complete rustic. With my Kathiawadi cloak, turban and dhoti, I looked somewhat more civilized than I do today, but the pomp and splendour of Mr. Petit's mansion made me feel absolutely out of my element. However, I acquitted myself tolerably well, having taken shelter under Sir Firoz Shah's protecting wing. Then there was the Gujarati function. The Gujaratis would not let me go without a reception which was organized by the late Uttamlal Trivedi. I had acquainted myself with the program beforehand. Mr. Jinnah was present. Being a Gujarati, I forget whether as president or as the principal speaker. He made a short and sweet little speech in English. As far as I remember, most of the other speeches were also in English. When my turn came, I expressed my thanks in Gujarati, explaining my partiality for Gujarati and Hindustani, and entering my humble protest against the use of English in a Gujarati gathering. This I did not without some hesitation, for I was afraid lest it should be considered discourteous for an inexperienced man, returned home after a long exile, to enter his protest against established practices. But no one seemed to misunderstand my insistence on replying in Gujarati. In fact, I was glad to note that everyone seemed reconciled to my protest. The meeting thus emboldened me to think that I should not find it difficult to place my newfangled notions before my countrymen. After a brief stay in Bombay, full of these preliminary experiences, I went to Poona, whither Gokhale had summoned me. The moment I reached Bombay, Gokhale sent me word that the governor was desirous of seeing me and that it might be proper for me to respond before I left for Poona. Accordingly, I called on His Excellency. After the usual inquiries, he said, "I ask one thing of you. I would like you to come and see me whenever you propose to take any steps concerning government." I replied. I can very easily give the promise, inasmuch as it is my rule as a Satyagrahi to understand the viewpoint of the party I propose to deal with and to try to agree with him as far as may be possible. I strictly observed the rule in South Africa and I mean to do the same here. Lord Wellington thanked me and said, You may come to me whenever you like, and you will see that my government do not wilfully do anything wrong. To which I replied, It is that faith which sustains me. After this I went to Poona. It is impossible for me to set down all the reminiscences of this precious time. Gokhale and the members of the Servants of India Society overwhelmed me with affection. So far as I recollect, Gokhale had summoned all of them to meet me. I had a frank talk with them all on every sort of subject. Gokhale was very keen that I should join the society, and so was I. But the members felt that, as there was a great difference between my ideals and methods of work and theirs, it might not be proper for me to join the society. Gokhale believed that, in spite of my insistence on my own principles, I was equally ready and able to tolerate theirs. But, he said, the members of the society have not yet understood your readiness for compromise. They are tenacious of their principles and quite independent. I am hoping that they will accept you, but if they don't, you will not for a moment think that they are lacking in respect or love for you. They are hesitating to take any risk, lest their high regard for you should be jeopardized. But whether you are formally admitted as a member or not, I am going to look upon you as one. I informed Gokhale of my intentions. Whether I was admitted as a member or not, I wanted to have an ashram where I could settle down with my Phoenix family, preferably somewhere in Gujarat, as being Gujarati, I thought I was best fitted to serve the country through serving Gujarat. Gokhale liked the idea. He said, You should certainly do so. Whatever may be the result of your talks with the members, you must look to me for the expenses of the ashram, which I will regard as my own. My heart overflowed with joy. It was a pleasure to feel free from the responsibility of raising funds and to realize that I should not be obliged to set about the work all on my own, but that I should be able to count on a sure guide whenever I was in difficulty. This took a great load off my mind. So the late Dr. Dev was summoned and told to open an account for me in the society's books and to give me whatever I might require for the ashram and for public expenses. I now prepared to go to Shantiniketan. On the eve of my departure, Gokhale arranged a party of selected friends, taking good care to order refreshments of my liking, that is, fruits and nuts. The party was held just a few paces from his room, and yet he was hardly in a condition to walk across and attend it. But his affection for me got the better of him, and he insisted on coming. He came but fainted and had to be carried away. Such fainting was not a new thing with him, and so when he came to, he sent word that we must go on with the party. This party was of course no more than a conversation in the open space opposite the society's guest house, during which friends had heart-to-heart chats over light refreshments or groundnuts, dates and fresh fruits of the season. But the fainting fit was to be no common event in my life. From Poona I went to Rajkot and Porbandar, where I had to meet my brother's widow and other relatives. During the Satyagraha in South Africa, I had altered my style of dress so as to make it more in keeping with that of the indentured labourers, and in England also I had adhered to the same style for indoor use. For landing in Bombay, I had a Kathiawadi suit of clothes consisting of a shirt, a dhoti, a cloak and a white scarf, all made of Indian milk cloth. But as I was to travel third from Bombay, I regarded the scarf and the cloak as too much of an encumbrance. So I shed them and invested in an 8 to 10 annas Kashmiri cap. One dressed in that fashion was sure to pass muster as a poor man. On account of the plague prevailing at that time, third-class passengers were being medically inspected at Viramgam or Vadhavan, I forget which. I had slight fever. The inspector, on finding that I had a temperature, asked me to report myself to the medical officer at Rajkot and noted down my name. Someone had perhaps sent the information that I was passing through Vadhavan, for the tailor Motilal, a noted public worker of the place, met me at the station. He told me about the Viramgam customs and the hardships railway passengers had to suffer on account of it. I had little inclination to talk because of my fever and tried to finish with a brief reply which took the form of a question. Are you prepared to go to jail? I had taken Motilal to be one of those impetuous youths who do not think before speaking. But not so Motilal, he replied with firm deliberation. We will certainly go to jail provided you lead us. As Kathiawadis, we have the first right on you. Of course, we do not mean to detain you now, but you must promise to halt here on your return. You will be delighted to see the work and the spirit of our youths, and you may trust us to respond as soon as you summon us. Motilal captivated me. His comrade, eulogizing him, said, Our friend is but a tailor, but he is such a master of his profession that he easily earns ₹15 a month, which is just what he needs, working an hour a day, and gives the rest of his time to public work. He leads us all, putting our education to shame. Later, I came in close contact with Motilal, and I saw that there was no exaggeration in the eulogy. He made a point of spending some days in the then newly started ashram every month to teach the children tailoring and to do some of the tailoring of the ashram himself. He would talk to me every day of Viramgam and the hardships of the passengers, which had become absolutely unbearable for him. He was cut off in the prime of youth by a sudden illness, and public life at Vadhavan suffered without him. On reaching Rajkot, I reported myself to the medical officer the next morning. I was not unknown there. The doctor felt ashamed and was angry with the inspector. This was unnecessary, for the inspector had only done his duty. He did not know me, and even if he had known me, he should not have done otherwise. The medical officer would not let me go to him again and insisted on sending an inspector to me instead. Inspection of third-class passengers for sanitary reasons is essential in such occasions. If big men choose to travel third, whatever their position in life, they must voluntarily submit themselves to all the regulations that the poor are subjected to, and the officials ought to be impartial. My experience is that the officials, instead of looking upon third-class passengers as fellow men, regard them as so many sheep. They talk to them contemptuously and brook no reply or argument. The third-class passenger has to obey the official as though he were his servant, and the latter may, with impunity, belabor and blackmail him and book him his ticket only after putting him to the greatest possible inconvenience, including often missing the train. All this I have seen with my own eyes. No reform is possible unless some of the educated and the rich voluntarily accept the status of the poor, travel third, refuse to enjoy the amenities denied to the poor, and, instead of taking avoidable hardships, discourtesies and injustice as a matter of course, fight for their removal. Wherever I went in Kathiawad, I heard complaints about the Viramgam customs hardships. I therefore decided immediately to make use of Lord Wellington's offer. I collected and read all the literature available on the subject, convinced myself that the complaints were well founded, and opened correspondence with the Bombay government. I called on the private secretary to Lord Wellington and waited on His Excellency also. The latter expressed his sympathy but shifted the blame on Delhi. If it had been in our hands, we should have removed the cordon long ago. You should approach the government of India, said the secretary. I communicated with the government of India but got no reply beyond an acknowledgement. It was only when I had an occasion to meet Lord Chelmsford later that redress could be had. When I placed the facts before him, he expressed his astonishment. He had known nothing of the matter. He gave me a patient hearing, telephoned that very moment for papers about Viramgam, and promised to remove the cordon if the authorities had no explanation or defense to offer. Within a few days of this interview, I read in the papers that the Viramgam customs cordon had been removed. I regarded this event as the advent of a Satyagraha in India. For during my interview with the Bombay government, the secretary had expressed his disapproval of a reference to Satyagraha in a speech which I had delivered in Bagasra in Kathiawad. Is not this a threat? He had asked. And do you think a powerful government will yield to threats? This was no threat, I had replied. It was educating the people. It is my duty to place before the people all the legitimate remedies for grievances. A nation that wants to come into its own ought to know all the ways and means to freedom. Usually they include violence as the last remedy. Satyagraha, on the other hand, is an absolutely non-violent weapon. I regard it as my duty to explain its practice and its limitations. I have no doubt that the British government is a powerful government, but I have no doubt also that Satyagraha is a sovereign remedy. The clever secretary skeptically nodded his head and said, "We shall see." From Rajkot I proceeded to Shantiniketan. The teachers and students overwhelmed me with affection. The reception was a beautiful combination of simplicity, art and love. It was here I met Kaka Saheb Kalelkar for the first time. I did not know then why Kalelkar was called Kaka Saheb, but I learnt later on that Sergeant Keshavrao Deshpande, who was a contemporary and a close friend of mine in England, and who had conducted a school in the Baroda state called Ganganath Vidyalaya, had given the teachers family names with a view to investing the Vidyalaya with a family atmosphere. Sergeant Kalelkar, who was a teacher there, came to be called Kaka, meaning paternal uncle. Phadke was called Mama, meaning maternal uncle. And Harihar Sharma received the name Anna, brother. Others also got similar names. Anandanand Swami as Kaka's friend and Patvardhan Appa as Mama's friend later joined the family, and all in course of time became my co-workers one after another. Sergeant Deshpande himself used to be called Saheb. When the Vidyalaya had to be dissolved, the family also broke up, but they never gave up their spiritual relationship or their assumed names. Kaka Saheb went out to gain experience of different institutions, and at the time I went to Shantiniketan, he happened to be there. Chintaman Shastri, belonging to the same fraternity, was there also. Both helped in teaching Sanskrit. The Phoenix family had been assigned separate quarters at Shantiniketan. Maganlal Gandhi was at their head, and he had made it his business to see that all the rules of the Phoenix ashram should be scrupulously observed. I saw that by dint his fragrance felt in the whole of Shantiniketan. Andrews was there, and also Pearson. Amongst the Bengali teachers with whom we came in fairly close contact were Jagadanand Babu, Nepal Babu, Santosh Babu, Kshiti Mohan Babu, Nagen Babu, Sharad Babu and Kali Babu. As is my wont, I quickly mixed with the teachers and students and engaged them in a discussion on self-help. I put it to the teachers that if they and the boys dispensed with the services of paid cooks and cooked their food themselves, it would enable the teachers to control the kitchen from the point of view of the boys' physical and moral health, and it would afford to the students an object lesson in self-help. One or two of them were inclined to shake their heads. Some of them strongly approved of the proposal. The boys welcomed it, if only because of their instinctive taste for novelty. So we launched the experiment. When I invited the poet to express his opinion, he said that he did not mind it provided the teachers were favorable. To the boys he said, "The experiment contains the key to Swaraj." Pearson began to wear away his body in making the experiment a success. He threw himself into it with zest. A batch was formed to cut vegetables, another to clean the grain, and so on. Nagen Babu and others undertook to see to the sanitary cleaning of the kitchen and its surroundings. It was a delight to me to see them working spade in hand. But it was too much to expect the 125 boys with their teachers to take to this work of physical labor like ducks to water. There used to be daily discussion. Some began early to show fatigue, but Pearson was not the man to be tired. One would always find him with his smiling face doing something or other in or about the kitchen. He had taken upon himself the cleaning of the bigger utensils. A party of students played on their sitar before this cleaning party in order to beguile the tedium of the operation. All alike took the thing up with zest, and Shantiniketan became a busy hive. Changes like these, when once begun, always develop. Not only was the Phoenix party's kitchen self-conducted, but the food cooked in it was of the simplest. Condiments were eschewed. Rice, dal, vegetables and even wheat flour were all cooked at one and the same time in a kitchen with a view to introducing reform in the Bengali kitchen. One or two teachers and some students ran this kitchen. The experiment was, however, dropped after some time. I am of the opinion that the famous institution lost nothing by having conducted the experiment for a brief interval, and some of the experiences gained could not but be of help to the teachers. I had intended to stay at Shantiniketan for some time, but fate willed otherwise. I had hardly been there a week when I received from Poona a telegram announcing Gokhale's death. Shantiniketan was immersed in grief. All the members came over to me to express their condolences. A special meeting was called in the ashram temple to mourn the national loss. It was a solemn function. The same day I left for Poona with my wife and Maganlal. All the rest stayed at Shantiniketan. Andrews accompanied me up to Bardwan. "Do you think," he asked me, "that a time will come for Satyagraha in India? And if so, have you any idea when it will come?" "It is difficult to say," said I. "For 1 year I am to do nothing. For Gokhale took from me a promise that I should travel in India for gaining experience and express no opinion on public question until I have finished the period of probation. Even after the year is over, I will be in no hurry to speak and pronounce opinions. and so I do not suppose there will be any occasion for Satyagraha for 5 years or so. I may note in this connection that Gokhale used to laugh at some of my ideas in Hind Swaraj or Indian Home Rule and say, "After you have stayed a year in India, your views will correct themselves."